today is hugely significant. The ancient Irish fought a lot, but it was a very civilized and ritualized form of fighting. And in a way, today is another ritualized civil war, ironically, between the Ulster men and the Connaught men. So maybe Ellen might explain the reason for the bringing it forward by an hour.
Well, thanks everybody for being so understanding today. Mayo are in the Gaelic Football All-Ireland final today against Tyrone. And Mayo haven't won the All-Ireland in 70 years. The last time they won it was in 1951. And there is a story that is told how the Mayo men in 1951, when they were returning from their victory, they back to Mayo. There was a funeral going through one small town on there, and they didn't stop for the funeral. And the priest who was officiating over the funeral cursed the Mayo men and said they wouldn't win another All Ireland until the last man in the squad had died. And they have been in six, I think, All Ireland finals in the last number of years, and they haven't won. So, and there's one man still living, and he's 95. So because Mayo is up against Tyrone today, we're hoping that the curse of Macha will trump the priest's curse today. And that may so the match is this afternoon, and I think the kickoff is at 5, Sandy, not at 5:30. But anyway, so right. Thanks everybody for your understanding.
Okay, well, just a little bit of a framing on what we're doing here. One of the cycles that we've done an awful lot of work on is the mythological cycle, and that is essentially a cycle built around the goddess culture. The Tuatha Danann are the people of the goddess Danu. And one of the delights of Irish mythology is that it actually is not one mythology, but arguably 3 or 4. And in a way, the shift that is so significant here, it's from the goddess culture to a more patriarchal warrior culture. And in a way, it begins arguably with where we began last week, which was with Cuchulainn's grandmother, Nessa, who we learn is a gentle woman who finds one day that warriors have taken out her family, her relations, her whole community. And that horrible trauma of having your homeland destroyed begins a move really to the warrior culture. And you can totally understand it because who wouldn't have as their primary concern the defense of their loved ones? But that is one of the starting points, and we started there last week with Nessa, and then Tom told the early story of Cuchulainn, and then we carried on with Dectine, Cuchulainn's mother. But in a way, one of the things we can understand is that, or look at, is this myth a celebration? Is it romanticizing the warrior, or is it rather treating it as a tragedy? Is the Táin a tragedy or is the Táin a romance? And I think having the more traditional tellings, and today we're going to hear from Chaobang, and then hear Karina do her wonderful retellings from the perspective of the female characters. And this today it's going to be Macha and Scahach. two very formidable ladies. And in a way, what we might hold in our head is this thought that to do the female characters represent a very different take on the Torn from what's often a conventional romantic reading of this archetypal warrior, this guy that certainly if you're going out in the Sam Maguire to represent Mayo or Tyrone, you do want your Cucullins who stand up, put their neck on the line for eternal glory. And that's certainly what will happen to any team today that wins. Your life might be short, but you will be sung about in song for eternity. It's a form of immortality through the oral tradition. Anyway, without more ado, over to Chaobang, who is going to take us through the curse of Macha.
I am Chaobang. I wander the worlds. And this is my account of how Macha cursed the warriors of Ulster. Macha. Macha, mighty goddess of war, land, and sovereignty. She of the horses and ravens, of the rise and fall of civilizations, of maps and charts spread out on tables, of the rampant fertility of fields and flesh alike. That is a lot of responsibility, which probably explains why, after goodness knows how many ages of presiding over births and deaths, and kings and queens, and turbulent realms and shifting battlefronts and such like, the goddess Macha perhaps began to feel a bit worn out by such a relentless grief. And she looked, as she so often did, across the lush territories she had come to know so well from her work, and the thought occurred to her of how much simpler the life of all those little people living out there must surely be. Surely, she contemplated, there'd be no harm in putting down the weight of her duties for a bit and spending just a little time seeing what it was like to live among them, to live as one of them. After all, she'd hardly be the first. Now, it so happened that out there among these ordinary people was a farmer named Cronku. This Cronku was an all-round decent and humble fellow, but of late he'd fallen upon hard times. The death of his wife from illness had broken his heart and thrown his life out of balance. And since then, he'd been stuck in a routine that was all he really knew and all he could really do to distract himself from his grief. That is, to get up really early each morning and throw himself into a day of hard toiling in the fields, during which his house fell into disarray and his 3 small children languished without him there to care for them. Imagine his shock then when one day he came back and opened his door to find his house sparkling clean. You know, the floors were scrubbed, the things on the shelves are all lined up exactly right. Everything, in fact, was ordered to almost military precision. And even his 3 small children sat really quiet around the table because, and this was most astonishing of all, there was this remarkable woman, a formidable woman standing there by the fire. She was towering. She was so much bigger and obviously stronger than he was, and her eyes shone with the sheen of otherworldly steel. And right there in his house, she was effortlessly stirring up some dinner whose scent was the most incredible to ever caress his nostrils. He almost fell over in surprise. He was like, "Wow, who are you?" And the woman replied, "Oh, my name's Macha. You seemed lonely enough. I've decided to move in with you. I'm sure you won't mind." It was more a statement than a question, of course. And when Cronku finished standing there gaping at his intimidatingly attractive new housemate, he just about managed to get out, "Well, no, I don't mind. Of course, please do." Well, And so it was that Macha settled in with this flabbergasted little farmer and so gave herself a taste of how the mortals live. That said, she was still the goddess of land, war, and sovereignty at heart. She couldn't help it if, say, she felt compelled to put Cronku's house in safe and efficient order. You know, it was a sort of shambles. It really needed it. Or to thrill and edify his three little kids with, you know, exciting military drills and epic stories. Or to instruct Kronku in all the ways he could improve his farming techniques. And from one of these exercises to another, she glided with such incredible speed that it was as if her boots never even touched the ground. As the days passed, Kronku forgot all about his troubles. He grew happier, he grew much wealthier under Macha's influence on his fields. And as he did, he rose in prestige through the social circles of Ulster. And of course, in that same time, he and Macha grew closer. That is to say, much closer. Let's give him a little bit of privacy and move forward to a few months later, where we see the king of Ulster, Conor MacNessa, summoning his people to a great feast up to the royal fort. He had a particular reason for doing this on this occasion. King Conor had just settled the purchase of a splendid set of new chariot horses. And he being the boastful sort, he couldn't help wanting to show these off to everyone. Now, by this point, the farmer Kronku had gone up in the world. His marvelous produce was all the rage in the marketplace outside the fort, and the talk of the king's most learned agronomists within it. Because his farm had stunned them all for what seemed the almost supernatural quality of its output. Needless to say, when King Conor issued the summons to his feast, Kronku's name was right up near the top of the list. But when Kronku excitedly broke this news to Macha, she grew very concerned. You know, she didn't want all of Ulster to know that she was there. I mean, that would defeat the whole point of coming there in the first place, wouldn't it? So not only did she decline to go to the feast with Kronku, she also gave him a warning. She said, "Whatever you do, under no circumstances are you to breathe a word about me at this feast. If you utter so much as a hint about my presence, I'm making it clear that that can only result in a very, very bad time for everyone involved." Yeah? It was a forceful warning. Kronku was more than a little afraid. So he gave her his word. Absolutely, under no circumstances would he talk about her. He promised. And having promised that, he went off to King Conor's feast. And though it was a fabulous event, the king had spared no expense whatever. Kronku even got to touch the king's magnificent new horses, to a stroke on the nose like this. But while he did so, he couldn't suppress the suspicion that their strength, their speed, their robustness, their beauty must all surely pale in comparison to those of his magical companion. He partook in the mountain of delicious foods that the king had laid on for everyone, but it didn't taste quite so special as that he'd now got used to at home. And then more and more drinks came out, of course, and as Kronku and the other guests all ascended the rungs of inebriation, he listened to all these swaggering warriors boasting about their own horses and their own companions with their amazing strength and their skill and their cooking and so forth. And Kronku found his tongue aching more and more from how hard he was having to bite it. At last, King Conor himself stood up, and with a bombastic swig from his goblet, he bragged to the whole room that there's no creature anywhere in Ireland, none at all, that was faster than his new horses. And it was at this point, in a haze of drink, that Kronku's self-control failed him, and unable to hold back his pride any longer, he shouted back, "Nah, have you seen the woman I live with? She could beat these horses in any race." To which Conor roared, "Who said that? You farmer, how dare you? How dare you? Seize him!" And that's why Macha was seeing to Kronku's house as usual when she received a knock at the door. She opened it and she found some of Conor's soldiers standing outside. And she said, "What's this about? Where is Kronku?" And the soldiers, they were themselves extremely surprised and taken aback by Macha's imposing presence. And they were like, no, I'm sorry. The thing is, Kronku's been arrested. And, we're very sorry, truly, it's nothing to do with us, okay? We're just messengers, don't hurt us. But you see, the king demands that the woman who lives with Kronku goes to the fort and proves his boast that she can run faster than the royal horses. And it was then that Macha realized that the humble farmer she'd moved in with had grown too proud and had broken his promise not to blab about her. Humans, yeah, humans. So of course she said, I shall do no such thing. After all, and here she pointed down, you may observe that I'm 9 months pregnant. Do you believe it's reasonable that I be asked to exert myself in these circumstances? And the soldiers did observe, and of course they were very frightened, but they managed to add, but see, the thing is that the king says, if you don't come, Kronku is going to pay for his lie with his life. Right, said Macha. Right, yeah, I'll talk to the king. We'll resolve this. So of course she marched up to the fort to confront King Connor, who was still drunkenly grumbling about how, Kronku, just a simple farmer, had dared humiliate the great King Connor in front of everybody. But as Macha strode into the hall, he, the king too, was alarmed to at last look on this huge, intimidating figure in person. And she told him, let Kronku go at once. And king as he was, Connor knew immediately there was no way he could directly force someone like this to do anything she didn't want to. The thing is, though, in these early years of his kingship, Connor MacNessa had grown as proud and haughty as they came. He insisted, you see, Kronku has claimed you are faster than my horses, and honor demands that he stake his life on the proof. Now, okay, I don't fancy my blade's chances against that fortress of a neck that you've got, but your beloved Kronku, he's just a simple farmer. I'd wager his neck bleeds as easily as the rest of them, no? So it is very simple. It's like this. You agree to race my horses, or Kronku dies. And at this, Macha had to concede that this king was as cunning as he was corrupt. There was no way that her honor as a goddess of war and sovereignty could allow a civilian like Kronku to be put to the sword like that. And she said, you do realize I'm pregnant. You do realize the risk you're subjecting my body to if I race. And Connor replied, nah, my good name is more important than your body. You race my horses or your farmer's going to die. Yeah. And at this, Macha turned to all the assembled warriors of Ulster. She reminded them that each and every one of them had been born from a woman's body, and so should know the disgrace of putting her in this position. Well then, she said, have any of you anything to say? The thing is, not one of them spoke up. They were all still hungover from the feast, and they're all curious. Now they actually set eyes on this remarkable woman to see if she really could beat the king's horses. And some of them thought she actually might. And so Macha turned back to the king. I'll give you one last chance, she said. I'll race the horses, but at least postpone the race until I've given birth and had time to recover. If anything happens, because you make me race like this now, I guarantee you're going to regret it. You're going to have a really bad time. But the drunken Connor ignored her warning. He says, you race my horses today. He said, you race them and you beat them, otherwise Kronku's going to die. Yeah. That's why he went, no, it's very important. The race was held on the grass outside the fort. As Connor had gone to prepare his horses, he'd begun to sober up a little, and belatedly, the gravity of that woman had started to sink into him. And it troubled him. She was, in some ways, unlike any woman he'd met before, but in another way, somehow like a great many of them. Indeed, it was as if meeting her had made him aware of something he'd missed in women before. Something really important. He didn't know what, just that it was really important. Something supreme in some cosmic sense that he didn't quite have this, the cognitive dimensionality to get his mind. I'm just trying to be polite, trying to get his mind around. He's an idiot. And he realized he was deeply afraid. The possibility occurred to him, actually was the certainty, that this woman would actually defeat his horses. And so what did he do? He went up to his chariot and he tore off all the decorations, all the cushions, all the cloth, every bit of superfluous weight, in fact, until all that remained was the wood. And not trusting anyone else with this, he unfastened his armor, he pulled off his cloak, he disarmed and dejeweled until he stood there only in his barest linen. And like that, he climbed up and took the reins in person. Macha stood at the line waiting for him. She just wanted to get this travesty over with now. The armies of Ulster crowded eager down the sides of the course. The sun shone high in the sky. The king's chariot took position. And they raced. How they raced. The king's horses, they galloped for all their worth, galloped in perfect unison, galloped faster than any horses in recorded history, so fast that even their cousins in Mongolia would have been very impressed. It was just very difficult. They pulled him forth, so swift that it felt like they were the wind itself. But the wind itself was not swift enough, because Macha, she was swifter than the wind. Hers was the will of the very land they raced on, covered it so impossibly fast that her boots barely appeared to touch it. The king's horses couldn't even hope to close the gap between them. It was widening further and further and further as Macha approached the final length, but then, just as the finish line came in sight, Macha screamed in pain. She staggered towards the end, bellowing louder and louder, clutching herself, bending over as the course she ran trailed with her blood. And the excitement on the faces of all those watching soldiers, it just plunged away. It was replaced by surging dread, because it had dawned on them that this spectacle actually was not so entertaining. And it was now occurring to them, one by one, that they were about to have a really, really bad time. Macha collapsed over the goal. She crashed to the grass. The attendants and the physicians, they all rushed to her, but it was too late, because out came her children. One, then the other. Twins. Stillborn. Dead. And whose fault was it? Whose fault was it? The burning air itself seemed to ask of King Connor and the terrified warriors of Ulster. Whose fault was it? Whose? Because now the goddess of land, war, and sovereignty, who all of a sudden felt quite done with her idea of seeing what it might be like to live among these humans, she staggered to her feet and, dripping with blood and fire and agonized rage, she pointed straight at Conor MacNessa, the disgraced king of Ulster. And she declared, "You contemptible wretch! What person, what ruler would abuse and humiliate as you have dared to today? Have you any idea how much this hurts? Have you? Well, now you shall know exactly how much it hurts, because Conchobar MacNessa of Ulster and all you warriors, just as each of you lacked the strength to speak out for me, so shall your strength become useless to you in your own time of greatest need. Each time your kingdom is in peril, each time you are called to arms, every fighter among you shall be struck down with the pains of childbirth. And for 9 days and for 9 nights, you shall writhe." And they writhed. Right there they writhed. How they writhed. And while he was writhing, Conor MacNessa opened his mouth to protest. But for once, he found he couldn't utter a word. In fact, perhaps it was only now he really became a king, because it was only now, at long last, that he'd come to understand a thing or two about power. And Macha meant it. Oh, they'd well find out that she meant it. As she gathered up the sad remains of her twins and soared from the field of Ulster, never to return, every man who saw her knew in his trembling meat that this was a lesson he would never, ever forget. That wasn't all. Even that wasn't all. Because, you see, Macha had got her taste of the humans of this world, and so bitter was that taste that she must have felt even a curse like that wasn't going to teach them. And so she decided to make real sure, because when she got back, the first thing she did was to unfurl her map, and from that day forth, the warriors of Ulster would be reminded of their disgrace with each mere mention of the new name with which, without ever quite understanding why, they took to referring to their fort and seat of power. It's the name it has held ever since. Owen Macha, the twins.